This is the Unsure Podcast, the podcast about atheism, religion, and everything in between.
Good morning and welcome to the Unsure Podcast. Today's opening music is If I Could Hide to Kolob, formed by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. That's fitting because this episode is all about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a movement whose members are often referred to informally as Mormons. Now, I don't want to patronise my listeners. Many of you are deeply engaged in theological or spiritual thought. But for those less familiar with Mormonism, here's a brief overview. Mormonism emerged in the early 19th century in upstate New York when its founder, Joseph Smith, claimed to have translated a sacred text, the Book of Mormon, from golden plates revealed to him by an angel. Today, the LDS Church is a global religion with millions of members and a strong presence in the United States, particularly Utah. Its theology blends Christian beliefs with distinctive doctrines, including the idea of continuing revelation and a structured plan for human salvation. Earlier this year, I decided to engage with the LDS Church directly, not as a believer, but as a curious outsider. I met with missionaries, attended Book of Mormon study classes, and even went to Sunday services. This episode is about what I experienced and what I learned. I'm Robert Shaw, and this is my Mormon Experience. My story begins one lethargic Tuesday afternoon back in England. Whilst idly scrolling through Facebook, I saw an ad offering a free book. Never want to turn down something free, especially if it's spiritually or culturally loaded. I clicked, submitted my details, and thought no more of it. That book was the Book of Mormon. The very next day, I received a WhatsApp message from a pair of local LDS missionaries. Their profile picture showed two clean-cut, smiling young men in suits, a visual you'll recognise if you've ever seen a Mormon mission team. They offered to meet. Soon, my social media algorithms turned decisively Mormon. My YouTube and Facebook feeds filled with ads.
We are missionaries for Jesus Christ, and we teach people about how to find a place.
We have taken 2 years to be able to teach people about God's love and God's plan for them.
We know that the message that we share is profound.
Have you ever wondered if God really does love you?
If so, we can come meet with you and pray with you and help you feel of His love.
Are you new to the area and looking for a new church home? Hi, we're missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Is God real? Where do I fit in this huge world? What happens after I die? What about my family? See, these are all questions I've had throughout my life.
Photogenic, cheerful young people offering community direction and spiritual fulfillment, though curiously vague on theology or history. Joseph Smith's name, or the Book of Mormon itself, barely featured. Instead, the messaging focused on the universal human search for belonging and meaning. A few days later, I visited the local LDS temple and received my free Book of Mormon. I met with the same missionaries from the WhatsApp photo. Not completely disingenuously, I explained quite truthfully that I guess, as we all are, I'm on a spiritual journey. This podcast being evidence of that, although I leave that detail out of our chat. And I want to learn more about the church. Around the same time, I reached out to Ryan Erwin, whose life story is rooted in the LDS world, but who has since left the church. I wanted a second perspective, and I'm glad I did. Good morning, Ryan. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about your experience with the LDS Church. Is it something that you were brought up in?
Yeah, I was born in a small town in Utah where the Mormon pioneers, they're kicked out everywhere they went. They settled out west in the desert. My hometown is called Brigham City, which is named after the second Mormon prophet, Brigham Young. And I was raised in a very devout Mormon family all my life. All my cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone was in it. I think it was something about 80% of my high school was Mormon. It's a very strong Mormon town. Then I went on a mission, 2-year mission to preach the good word down in Uruguay.
It sounds like you were very much immersed in the whole Mormon thing.
Yeah, I was in it to win it.
So in this episode, we have 2 stories. Mine as an outsider looking in, and Ryan's as an insider who got out. I was especially curious about the missionary system within the LDS Church. Young men, often just 18 or 19 years old, sent far from home to spend 2 years spreading the faith. I mentioned to Ryan a BBC documentary I'd seen some years ago, titled The Mormons Are Coming. It followed 3 missionaries serving in the England Manchester mission and painted a rather bleak picture. Set against the backdrop of an increasingly secular, even atheistic Britain, the documentary showed these young men facing a constant stream of closed doors, polite rejections and outright indifference. Day after day, they walked suburban streets, smiling through the drizzle, trying to spark spiritual conversations in a country where few were interested. It made me wonder, is that the norm? Is the life of a missionary often that monotonous, that emotionally taxing, seemingly unrewarding? So, I've encountered the missionaries in my town, and I did a few years ago watch a documentary about Mormon missionaries in the UK. It seemed for them quite a miserable existence. Going from door to door and 99.9% of people saying they're not interested. Was that your experience?
Yeah, it was a little different in Uruguay. I didn't serve in a lot of high population metro areas. I served in a lot of really small towns. So people were just outside all the time and walking the streets. So I had a lot more conversations just stopping people walking in the street as they were walking to their friend's house or to the grocery store or something. But we didn't knock on doors. The cultural custom was you stood at the barrier line. Some people had a fence, some people didn't, but you would just clap.
Oh, wow.
We didn't knock on a lot of doors. That was kind of disrespectful to go all the way up to someone's door. So you would just stand back in front of their house and go, hola, and clap. So I didn't knock on a lot of doors, but yeah, we were rejected a lot. And especially because I was always in a small town, I knew the names of the people that were not interested.
Okay. And in the parts of Uruguay that you were in, what was the dominant religious tradition there? Presumably Catholicism.
Yeah, there was a lot of Catholicism, a lot of different offshoots of Christianity. People were like, oh yeah, we'll get baptized in your church. That's fine. And one lady was like, I should get baptized in all of them because you just never know. One's the right one. I was like, all right, pretty solid logic if I'm going to be honest. If I get baptized in every church, I'm bound to get it right. So I was like, all right. But a lot of Catholicism and just a lot of non-denominational Christian where they're we would just meet at this church. Or maybe they were an offshoot of Methodist or Presbyterian that I just wasn't familiar with. But there were lots of churches. Most people considered themselves religious in some way, shape, or form. I didn't feel like I had to convince people that God existed. I tried to convince them that this was the right church.
And I've certainly noticed a contrast between these guys in this documentary I saw a few years ago, where perhaps it was the narrative that the documentary maker wanted to push. You've got to be aware of that, haven't you? But the young Mormon missionaries that I've encountered seem quite upbeat. And whereas this documentary I saw a few years ago, it's almost like the faith of the missionaries, they were perhaps a little bit unsure of their faith, maybe. They were there because of a family tradition of becoming a missionary. But the guys that I've encountered, it's clear that their faith is genuine. They genuinely do believe that Mormonism is the true religion and the Book of Mormon is a record of supernatural events. Where would you place yourself on that continuum at this particular time in your life? Were you an enthusiastic member of the church?
Oh, yeah, growing up, yeah, when I was a missionary, I think a lot of people might have classified that as me, but I left about a year after my mission. I said, I'm done with this. I know for me, and talking with a lot of other people who served missions who have subsequently left the church, there's a lot of faking it. There's a lot of, if I just believe, if I just tell everyone I believe, if I just say it, it'll come to me. Right now, I don't feel it, but I want to. Or like, my friends and family all told me, hey, this is true. This is what it's going to be. So you want that to be true. So they put on a show and we testify and we act in all earnestness because we genuinely want it to be true, because we want to be in line with all of our friends and family. But then we all hit a certain point in a wall where push comes to shove and we're like, I'm out of here. So that documentary, maybe it shows them outside of their public facing view. Because I feel like when I would interact with people, I was always very positive. Even when they were negative or anti, I was like, it's okay. Like, come visit us. Like, just trying to be as optimistic and positive as I could. But it was a long 2 years in my mission. We were particularly strict on a lot of rules, but I had to walk everywhere. So like some missionaries have bikes or cars. I couldn't use either of those because I was in a lot of small towns in Uruguay and we were discouraged from using public transportation. So there was lots of walking. So there was a lot of misery when you have to walk 10, 12 miles a day in a suit. But I tried putting on my best face for the people as I met them.
And obviously, this is a time of your life, 18, 19. Is there the temptation perhaps to engage in things like alcohol? Is there the temptation to engage in casual sex, but it's something that you can't do? Did you feel like it was your best years being taken away from you in a way and plonked in this strange place where you're just getting shunned by people?
Yeah, it's definitely a crucial time for a lot of young people. I personally never felt like I was missing out on anything. I grew up in a very Mormon town. No one in my friend group like drank or did drugs or had sex like through high school or whatever. So it wasn't ever part of my temptation. People would talk about the DARE program in the United States, just say no to drugs. I literally was never propositioned for drugs or alcohol until I was about 24, 25. I just didn't hang around people that did that. So for me, I didn't really feel like I was missing out on anything while I was on a mission. I know other people felt like they were, but I wasn't exposed to any of it growing up, so it never really interested me.
And it seems very much like when you're doing this missionary work that your life is completely absorbed by church matters. Was there any opportunities for downtime whilst you were in Uruguay?
So how a mission structure works is you wake up at 6:30 every day, and then you go to bed at 10:30. And in the meantime, they have a lot of things scheduled for you, like scripture study and prayer and meals and stuff. But then most of it, the day is you schedule when to go visit people and when to go like knocking doors or different things. But on Monday is you have what we called your preparation day. So from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., that was an 8-hour window where you were to do your laundry, where you were to email your family, where you were to, if you had like something you wanted to go do that was like touristy in your area. Of course, you couldn't like travel very far. But Monday, we called it P Day, your preparation day. So that was the day you could do things. Some people would get together and play sports with other missionaries or whatever. That was our down day, but it was also when we had to do chores. There wasn't a lot of downtime, and they intentionally do that so that you're constantly working and busy and that you don't like miss home or you don't get distracted or you don't become lazy.
Is it something that when you're very young, your parents will be saying things like, oh, when you do your missionary work and when you go here and when you go there, is it something that you're aware is going to happen when you're young?
Yeah, it is definitely the expectation. Boys have priesthood, and one of your priesthood responsibilities is to go do missionary work, that it is very much expected that every young man will turn 19. Now it's 18, but when I was growing up, it was when you turn 19, you'll go on a mission. When I was growing up, women could choose to go on a mission if they were 21 and older. It was still voluntary, but there's a lot of shame and stigma if you don't go on a mission as a boy. But now it's boys can go at 18 and girls can go at 19. But girls only go for 18 months while boys go for 2 years.
Did you ever convert someone as far as you're aware?
Yeah, so while I was there, I did baptize quite a few people. They at least accepted the promise of baptism and like went through with the whole process. And then in the Mormon church, there's like different, what they call covenants. Baptism is the first one. And then there's the confirmation of the Holy Ghost. And then there's like getting the priesthood for boys. And then there's going through the temple. And I baptized a lot of people who got confirmed with the Holy Ghost. And then a couple people that I baptized got the priesthood. And then there was one guy that I baptized who ended up becoming a missionary. So like a year and a half after he got baptized, he went out to be a missionary in, I think, Argentina or Chile for 2 years. So I did have success in getting people to join the church.
How many people over the course of the 2 years, if you could quantify, did you think you fostered an interest in the LDS Church?
I think the people that got baptized was somewhere in the 30s over the 2 years. And then there were a lot of people that were, we call them less active. So they don't go to church at all, or they go only every once in a while. And we would go visit them a lot. And so I, quote unquote, reactivated a lot of Mormons. I don't have a number on that one, but that was also a big focus, was to just get more people in church every Sunday. Comparing my mission to other friends who went to different parts of the world, I felt like I had a pretty productive mission.
Back in England, I received an invitation via WhatsApp to attend a Sunday church service. On the morning of the service, another message appears. A video giving a polite explanation of LDS Church etiquette, noting that members typically wear their best clothes to services. Lacking a suit and dressed casually, I worry I might stand out, or worse, embarrass the young missionaries who had invited me. Expecting a modest congregation, I'm surprised to find the chapel packed. I quietly slip into a seat near the back, and whilst there are many well-dressed families, young boys in three-piece suits and the like, I'm also relieved to see people dressed similarly to me, t-shirts, jeans, trainers. The artwork decorating the temple is familiar. Traditional Christian imagery, Jesus' baptism, the Sermon on the Mount, the Last Supper. There's little immediately distinctively Mormon, at least visually, although near the toilets, I notice a painting of Joseph Smith unearthing the golden plates on Camurra Hill, a rare reminder of the church's unique origin story. The service itself centres on Jesus' teaching and sacrifice, not unlike any other Christian service I've attended. Some of the hymns are familiar to me from my vaguely culturally Christian upbringing. A boy, no older than 14 and dressed in a navy suit, passes around the sacrament. Not wafers, but broken pieces of a standard loaf of bread, possibly Kingsmill or Wonder Bread, depending on your point of reference. The wine is replaced with tiny paper cups filled with water, in line with the Mormon prohibition against alcohol. For a moment I hesitate. I wonder if it's disrespectful to participate in communion, given my own uncertain spiritual position. But then I think, perhaps objectively, I'm simply eating a morsel of bread and drinking 5 millilitres of water, so I partake. Another thing that struck me is a significant number of attendees are black families, given the LDS's church troubled historical relationship with African Americans. Church attendance in general is more common within the UK's black communities, so in one sense this reflects a broader pattern, but the context of Mormonism complicates that picture. Until 1978, the Mormon Church banned black men from holding the priesthood, a central rite in Mormon faith and practice. Prior to that, the church also taught that black skin was a mark associated with a curse, a belief which persisted in official teaching materials for decades. Later, the pulpit is opened up for testimony. Any member of the congregation is welcome to speak. A handful rise and offer thoughts, stories, and expressions of gratitude. The only mention of Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon during the Sunday service comes during the open mic testimony segment. One speaker reflects candidly on Smith's imperfections and acknowledges criticisms of the Book of Mormon itself. There's an undertone of quiet defensiveness, or perhaps a resolute stubbornness around the book's divine origins and its translators' flaws. I've attended a Mormon church service, and I don't know whether this is done in all services, but there's almost like an open mic.
Fast and testimony meeting.
Okay, is that common?
Yeah, the first Sunday of every month is fast and testimony meeting. Everyone's fasting, so they're going without meals for the day. And then church service, instead of having scheduled speakers, It's just literally like a 30-minute open mic, and people can come up and bear their testimony of things. And that is a very unique thing to Mormonism and is a very interesting cultural experience, I feel like, for someone like you who doesn't know what Mormonism is, to get just random people just walking up, declaring things. And there's a lot of funny cultural isms in my ward. That's what we call our congregations growing up. There was always at least one old lady who would give an update about all of her grandkids every Sunday. She'd be like, my grandson Gary recently went to college. We're like, okay. Like, there's like, you can't really censor the woman, but she just wanted to bear her testimony about how much she loved her family and how thankful she is to God for them. We're like, all right. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing.
What I thought was quite striking from this kind of open mic session was that there were a series of people who came up to speak, and two stick in my mind. There was one young woman who was, I would say, around about 17, 18, still in education. And presumably in the States, you do something called work experience, where you'll go off whilst you're still in education and go and see what work is like and go and work somewhere for a couple of weeks. And she was trying to find a placement, and she was having issues trying to find somewhere to go for this work experience. And she prayed. And the following morning, she got an email and someone had offered her a placement, and it was all, thank God, etc., etc. She didn't see the fact that someone had just decided to offer a placement as a coincidence. She actually saw it as a divine answer to her prayer. And there was another guy in the military, and he talked about him being based in Kenya, I think, and it was quite troubled and they were quite vulnerable, and they got a guard dog because where they were staying was prone to being attacked or robbed or whatever. And he would say that when he prayed because he felt threatened or he felt down or whatever, this dog would appear and come and comfort him. Now, you can obviously read into that dogs are quite good at ascertaining what mood humans are in. And it was just the dog reacting to his owner being a bit sad or down or whatever. But what struck me is that it seemed to be the case that these people were suggesting that because they were a member of the true faith, God was more likely to answer their prayers. I immediately thought of, why is God sorting out your work experience and making a dog approach you when the prayers for world peace and the prayers to end famine in Africa are unanswered? Is there a sense in Mormonism that because you're a member of the true faith, that God is more likely to intervene in your life as opposed to intervening in the life of other Christian denominations?
I think that is a brilliant question that I don't think most Mormons consider. As you were asking it, I was like, wow, I've never thought through that. And the reason why I don't think I've ever thought through that is because growing up Mormon, we just believe that we are members of the true faith. We are God's chosen elect. We are following his plan. Because of like a sense of like arrogance, we just don't think about why other people's prayers aren't being answered. We are just focused on ours being answered. And maybe that's a little narrow-minded view, but there is definitely a sense of, I don't want to use the word elitism, but there is a sense amongst, like when I was going to church, that if you just have enough faith, God will answer your prayers. If you're good enough, God will answer your prayers. And because we've made covenants with him, because we've done this, there is that sort of connotation that where it's like, if you pray and you're not a member, there definitely is a chance he might not listen. Like, I think that mentality is more subconscious in a lot of Mormon minds rather than overt, in my opinion. As you were asking that, I was thinking through my own life, and I was like, I think you're right that people probably do think that. I just don't think they vocalize that.
Yeah, because I found some of the things that they were coming out with, and there was a talk by the elder, and it was very seductive. God knows you personally. God cares about you. He cares about every single aspect of your life, even though you might not think it. He cares about you. And God loves you, and God will forgive you for whatever you've done. And that's very seductive, but it's probably something that is done in non-Mormon churches as well, no doubt.
Yeah.
But certainly more so than in other Christian worship meetings that I've been to. There was a sense that God is intimately involved in every single part of your life, and he has a plan for you. And I thought to myself, is this for everyone, or is it just for members of this church? But perhaps you're right that there is a subconscious feeling. And you mentioned the word elitism. Perhaps exclusivist would be, you've got to.
I'm privy to God's truth, so I should be enlightened more than other people.
Yeah, exactly. And because I am a follower of the true faith, because I have more faith, because all Christians will come out with the line that you've got to have faith in order for God to answer your prayers. Yeah, and I'm just wondering if the Mormons setting themselves a little bit apart and above all of these churches that they view as not quite hitting the target, that they believe that God is more likely to intervene and play a part in their lives than he's going to for non-members of the church, maybe.
Yeah, I could see that. That's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought about that until you were asking that.
A week later, I attend a Book of Mormon study class. In the age of the internet, I find it somewhat incongruous that believers continue to accept the Book of Mormon as literal truth, given the wealth of historical and linguistic critiques available. There are well-documented anachronisms, mentions of silk and brass in pre-Columbian America, the existence of horses and sheep, artifacts which modern archaeology places centuries, if not millennia, out of context. Stylistically, the text raises questions. The repeated use of the phrase, "and it came to pass." I previously believed that the phrase, "and it came to pass," originated in the King James Bible, commissioned by King James I of England in 1604. Yet here it is, placed in the mouth of Nephi, narrating his family's journey from Israel to the Americas more than 2,000 years earlier. As with the man in the pulpit that Sunday, there is evidence of a concept referenced to by many Mormons, as well as those of any religious persuasion, that they just know as a matter of faith that their founder was a true man of God and that his holy book is true, in spite of, and perhaps arguably because of, compelling evidence to the contrary. A number of believers tell me that they prayed to God to ask him if the Book of Mormon was true and received a positive answer. In fact, a page of an LDS pamphlet given to me suggests I should do the very same thing. Like I said, I've been attending a Book of Mormon study class. I'm in the middle of 1 Nephi at the moment. So when you were a church member, your genuine belief that this was a record of God interacting with a group of people who then came to the Americas and were visited by Jesus and were like another group of God's chosen people. Well, you must have done. You must have subscribed to that belief in some shape or form.
Yeah, and maybe I was a weird Mormon, but it made sense to me that ancient societies would have some structure, and the visiting by God wasn't weird to me, and part of me wondered and accepted that there are books of Mormon or Bibles or whatever in Asia or Australia. It's why weren't there ancient civilizations instructed to write stuff down? So for me, a lot of people are but there's something other than the Bible. It's yeah, there's the Book of Mormon, but in my head, I'm well, it's only logical for me to assume that there might be other scriptural references or things in other parts of the world. So for me, the concept of you believe that he came to Americas, I'm well, why not? Why couldn't he have gone anywhere? For me, it didn't seem that outlandish that I thought there was actually more stuff out there when I was a Mormon. I thought eventually it would be revealed that we would find other ancient texts to add to the scriptures. So for me, the Book of Mormon, its subtitle is Another Testament of Jesus Christ. I was and I'm sure we'll have another and another. So it didn't seem wild to me that we had 2 scriptures. I thought we would have more, like, when I was in it.
During my time attending both services and scripture study classes, I'm struck by the high turnover of missionaries. Some seem to appear and disappear within weeks, reassigned to other parts of the UK to continue their mission elsewhere. Their movements are brisk, purposeful, a reminder that for them, this is a tightly structured chapter of life and not a settled spiritual community. I find myself wondering how many of them will eventually follow a path like Ryan, my guest on today's episode, who, like many before him, stepped away from the faith he was raised in before the age of 25. This seems to be a particularly common narrative within the LDS Church. The podcast world is filled with voices, often young, articulate former Mormons, who are now deconstructing, questioning, and sometimes openly criticising or satirising the tradition they once held sacred. Where will these missionaries be in 5 years' time? Some do leave the church. What will have tipped the scale? Will it be the allure of lifestyle freedoms, like the chance to drink alcohol? Will it be theological doubts about the Book of Mormon, about Joseph Smith, or the broader claims of LDS doctrine? Or will it be something subtler, perhaps the slow, persuasive pull of a naturalistic worldview that simply makes more sense to them? Curious to understand this process more intimately, I asked Ryan what it was that shifted things for him.
Well, I knew I was gay back in middle school, and in Mormonism, that's bad. And so I just was like, no, ignoring it. I ended up telling my best friend my senior year of high school, and then we didn't talk about it for 4.5 years because we just didn't know what to say. I went on my mission being like, God's going to make me straight. I just got to do what's expected of me, follow all the rules, do everything that I was told to do as a child, and it'll all work out. And then I came home from my mission, and I was like, oh, still gay. And I was still trying, went to church, did all these different things. And then about a year after my mission, I just said, I'm sick of just feeling guilty every Sunday walking into church, just being like, please forgive me for thinking that boy I saw the other day was cute. Like, I was just sick of feeling guilt. And I just hit a point one day where I literally, it wasn't a single catalyst that ended it for me. It was just like, I was just so worn down and exhausted that I was like, I'm throwing in the towel. I'm done with this.
And what was the most difficult thing? Was it admitting your homosexuality to your family, or the fact that you'd lost your faith?
I would say they were kind of equally hard for me, but I would say the reaction to leaving my faith was worse than coming out of the closet. I received more pushback for not going to church than declaring I was gay, which literally shocked me. I was like, oh, okay. Like, I came out, but I was like, but I still go to church. I'm just gay, but I still go to church. And then I was like, hey, I don't really go to church anymore. And then I was like, hey, I'm out. I've started dating. I definitely don't go to church. And that's when people were like, are you serious? I was like, wait, what? Like, I had to come out multiple times to you in different phases of like, I'm gay, but I'm still Mormon. And then it's like, I'm gay and I don't know if I'm Mormon. Then it's like, I'm gay and I'm not Mormon. And that's what I think people had a more shocking reaction to.
So, I mean, what is the official Mormon line on homosexuality? Because different Christian churches have different perspectives. Some are very accepting, some even perform same-sex marriage. And then you've got the opposite end, which is, it's an abomination and you're offending God. Are you saying that the Mormon church is very much towards that extreme?
Yeah. So growing up, like the rule of thumb was, if you have sex with a man, you get excommunicated, you get kicked out of the church, and that's just kind of like the rule. And so, of course, you can't marry a man, you can't, be in good standing at the church if you are gay. And so they definitely drew a hard and fast line. I will say there are distinct congregations throughout the world that they don't play that line so hard and fast. There are places where the local like clergy, the bishop is like their pastor, will kind of look past that. Like, I know friends who are married to a man but still go to church and are still considered in good standing, even though they're married to someone of the same gender. But for the most part, the general church's rule of thumb is, no, this is bad, you get kicked out.
And presumably because you were from a congregation in Utah, which is very much the hotbed of Mormonism, that perhaps the churches there had a much harder line.
I left before I even like went on a date with a guy. Like I just was like, I hadn't even like crossed that threshold. For me, it was just like, I'm protecting my peace. I have to get out of here. I have to do something. I have to get out of this space that makes me like hate myself. So yeah, I never went through that formal like discipline process. I just left.
But had you stayed in the church and perhaps the church elders, call them what you may, got wind of the fact that you're dating people of the same gender, would that have been a disciplinary matter had they found out about it?
Dating technically isn't breaking one of the commandments, like going on a date with someone, but like definitely if it crosses into like a sexual relationship, yeah, there would have been discipline. But technically you can date, even though that's definitely not encouraged.
Yeah. Well, it's terminology, when does a date become something romantic and so on? You could just argue that you were going out for a meal with someone, couldn't you, I suppose? But so what was the most difficult thing for you? Was it saying to your family, I don't want to be any part of Mormonism anymore? Or was it more difficult to say to them, I'm gay?
I felt like it was saying I'm gay, but it turned out to be the thing they had the more adverse reaction to was me saying I'm not Mormon. Cause like when I came out, I just like came out as gay to like a lot of some friends and family, but I was like still going to church, still trying to make it work, but I didn't know what it was. And then I started coming out to people like I'm gay and I don't really go to church. I don't really feel comfortable there. And then over time it was like, hey, I am gay and I've stopped going to church. I have left. And definitely that third category was where I was met with a lot more pushback than in the first category when I was like, hey, I'm gay, but like I still go to church. Everyone's like, it's okay. Like you can still pray. Like God will still love you. Like sort of mentality. The first wave of coming out was more difficult for me, but the third wave was more difficult for the people to accept.
So your sexuality was an issue with the church. Did you deconstruct Mormon beliefs around this time as well?
I honestly feel like if I wasn't gay, I would probably still be Mormon. I was kind of, for better or for worse, or I don't know, like willing to overlook maybe a lot of the flaws or things simply because, everyone I knew and loved was Mormon. And like, there were parts of the church I did enjoy. There's like, when you leave Mormonism, you're not just like leaving a faith home. The way they construct it is it's very much a social gathering. Like everyone has callings in the church. So whether they're teachers or activity coordinators, but it's like, for me, in my early 20s, there was volleyball every Wednesday night. There was basketball every Saturday. There was like different activities. There were movie nights. And it's like, there's a sense of community that you leave that I think had I been straight, I probably would have overlooked a lot of the doctrinal issues. And then even after leaving, there were a few things that like popped up here and there. I was like, yeah, that is weird. I just left because it just wasn't my thing. I haven't invested much time in going down the rabbit hole of Joseph Smith. I haven't gone down like questionable church history. I just was like, I didn't feel comfortable there, so I left, and I haven't really spent much time trying to debunk the church.
And since you have left the church, what's your relationship like with your family, and what's your relationship like with people who were similarly immersed in the Mormon church and perhaps still are? How do they see you, both as a heathen and as a gay man?
Yeah. Okay, so my whole family is still Mormon. I've got 3 siblings. They're all married. They all have kids. They're all older than me. I definitely put a strain on a lot of familial relationships for sure. We are all still talking. Like, we all still get together. Like, today's my dad's birthday, so I'm going to call him. But, like, it definitely strained a few relationships. My sister said it best. She goes, listen, it's not my place to judge. I love you. My job as your sister is to love you, and we'll let God sort it out in the afterlife. I said, okay. Like, she's always been like, if you meet a guy, I want to meet him. I want you to be happy. Like, she's very supportive. And then as far as my friends, even though we were all raised like super devout Inuit Mormons, we were all raised like, in my opinion, to be good people, that I never felt intense judgment from my close friends. I still talk with them weekly. Like, we have a group chat. Like, we message each other all the time. Whenever I go back home to Utah, We always hang out, and it's never awkward when they're like, oh, we're going to say a prayer before dinner. I just, I'm respectful that that's their belief, but none of them ever compel me to like rejoin the church. I don't feel judgment for my friend group. So as far as that goes, I didn't feel any pushback from that. And when I left, I was still living in Utah and I was a teacher. So I became a teacher. And so my faculty, most of them were all still Mormon, and I didn't feel any sort of like pushback or judgment from them. I think it's because I haven't been vocally anti-Mormon. I think if I was over here being like, you guys are dumb, how do you still believe that? Why do you still do, like, if I was like negative and like bombastic in my stumping against the church, I don't think I would have as many solid relationships as I do now. But I was bitter internally for about a year after I left. And then I was like, you know what? Just let it go. I can choose to be bitter. I can choose to be better. I'm just going to like move on with my life. And that has, I think, helped preserve a lot of my core relationships. I don't feel an intense amount of judgment from the people that I know and love. I do feel a lot of judgment from people who are like peripheral members of my life or my past life. Different people who are like, oh, you're gay, that sort of judgment. But from the people that I love, I don't feel that strain.
I did an episode about the Jehovah's Witnesses last year, for example, and there was very much the sense that when you leave the church, or even if you get involved in activities which are seen to be sinful, such as homosexuality, then you are completely ostracized and families will not speak to you. Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses find it really difficult because they have to replace in some way the family and friends that they had previously. But what you seem to be suggesting there is that that's not necessarily the case with Mormonism, and perhaps that's something we might give them some credit for.
Yeah, what I would say is I know a lot of people who are gay ex-Mormons or just ex-Mormons who have gone through what that Jehovah's Witness was describing. I know a lot of people who have been cut off from their family and friends and sort of things like that. But I will say there has been definitely a cultural shift over the past 15, 20 years. Like I started coming out, 12 years ago. But I remember in high school, I would hear, oh, a kid I know's older brother came out as gay and their family stopped talking to them. So like when I was like in the closet at 16, 17 years old, I would hear these horror stories of people that I knew who were being cut off. So that was a big hesitation for me coming out. But definitely in the early 2010s, I feel like there was a big cultural shift that is not the case like broadly. I think that's more niche. So I will say that is a good thing, but I don't think it's anything the church intentionally did. I think it's a culture of Gen X and millennials who are more open and accepting to LGBTQ lifestyles that just like as a cultural shift, they're like, well, why do I have to cut them off? Whereas back in the day, you were encouraged to. David Archuleta, a very famous singer in America, he was like runner-up on American Idol, came out as gay and his family still supported him. And actually his mom left the church a few years after him because she goes, I don't want to be where my son doesn't feel comfortable. So there is sort of like a generational shift, but I wouldn't say that's directed from any one person or thing from the church's headquarters. I just think it has been a more cultural shift to being accepting and loving, actually following Jesus as teacher.
Yeah, and I suppose in some ways it's going to be contextual, isn't it? It all depends on the personalities within that particular family, as opposed to it being something which is a universal experience for people who leave the church. So you've talked about becoming a teacher, and I believe now that you are a comedian. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, so I taught in Utah. I was a middle school theater teacher for about 10 years. And one year I moved apartments and my new roommate was a stand-up comedian. And I said, hey, that sounds fun. So I tried it out and I liked it and I was good at it. And a few years later, I quit teaching. I moved across the country and now I've been living in New York City for a little over 2 years now, doing stand-up comedy full time and traveling the world doing stand-up.
Wow. I mean, you've talked about you're not the type to rubbish the church and its teachings or whatever, but is there anything from your days as a Mormon that you draw on for your routines?
Yeah, absolutely. I was really resistant at first to talk about being Mormon, like being raised Mormon or whatever on stage, especially when I lived in Utah, because that's what every Utah comedian is talking about. They're bashing the church. And I was like, I want to do something different. So it wasn't until I left Utah that I started writing Mormon jokes. And this fall, I'm recording a new comedy special. And there's a big 15, 20-minute chunk about my experience growing up Mormon, going on a mission. Like, I have a joke in one of my previous specials where I talk about Uruguay. Yay, like I mentioned I went on a mission, but this is like I'm going to share stories from my mission. I'm going to share stories of my coming out and rationalizing that with my Mormonism. I'm glad I waited because now it's coming from a place of more like, this is interesting to talk about, where I feel like if I would have talked about it when I started stand-up, it would have come from a place of like rage or bitterness or judgment that like I now even have a joke in my act, right? Because I talk about Mormonism for like, extended period of time. And I go, listen, y'all don't need to get baptized. It's just your salvation. I'm just offering it to you. And I just like, I'm able to play off of it that like, because I don't disparage the church, it actually sounds like I'm like promoting it when I'm just sharing my experience of it, that it's a fun heel turn that you don't expect this gay guy to be advocating for Mormonism on stage. Like that's just like the last thing you expect. So there's a fun juxtaposition, but there are a lot of like silly stories. Like we do a thing called Trek, where we push handcarts in the desert for 6 days, like our pioneers did. And so I share a story about that. I share a story of mixing up a few Spanish words while as a Mormon missionary and just the irony of like the things I said as a Mormon missionary. So it's definitely become a big part of my act, but I try and approach it all in a way that both Mormons and non-Mormons can appreciate it and enjoy.
Excellent. And if people want to check out your comedy, what should be their first port of call?
My social media, so Ryan Erwin, Ryerwin. I've got a few clips out there on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. Although on TikTok, I mostly talk about the TV show Survivor, because that's my favorite show. Yeah, definitely this fall when I record it, I'm going to be putting it out on my YouTube and all my social media out there where I can talk about that.
A good place to end, Ryan. Thanks for joining me this morning. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you.
Thank you for having me.
And that brings to a close my Mormon experience. I must admit, I come away with a far less dismissive view of the church than I might have previously held. In the UK, where Mormonism has a much smaller footprint than in the United States, it's easy to group it with what some might call more overtly cult-like movements. But I found little to suggest the kinds of coercive tactics seen in groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses, nor any of the aggressive retaliation against critics often associated with Scientology. Yes, there are beliefs within Mormonism that may strike outsiders as eccentric. But then again, is Joseph Smith discovering an ancient record buried in upstate New York any more implausible than Moses receiving stone tablets directly from God on a mountaintop? Is the idea of pre-Columbian Americans using silk any more far-fetched than Abraham owning domesticated camels? And theologically, isn't the idea of continuing revelation and modern-day prophets more consistent with the idea of an unchanging and omnipresent God? The Church's historical attitude towards African Americans, though undeniably troubling, now seems to be in retreat, and perhaps, as uncomfortable as it is, that past reflected a broader, systemic racism in mid-20th century America, where black people had to use different toilets. And furthermore, what religion doesn't have a troubling history? And as for the social media intrusion, it's an example of how a simple click can open a floodgate of digital persuasion. Whether it's the LDS Church inviting you to a Sunday service, or a major retailer trying to get you back for that pair of shoes you almost bought, the game is the same. They've all mastered the dark art of the algorithm, using our own data to get our attention again and again. It's a reminder that in the digital world, we're all leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, and organizations, religious or otherwise, are more than happy to follow it. I browsed the website of the LDS Church in Montenegro that my missionary friends encouraged me to visit, and I was pleasantly surprised by a section where it appears to encourage attendees to engage in activities that make them more Christ-like. They have a food bank for those dealing with poverty and provide clothes for people who cannot afford them, delivering a sort of service and compassion that echoes Jesus' teachings far more than the politicized Christianity rising in some parts of the world. I still get WhatsApp messages from the missionaries I met Some might interpret this cynically, a gentle nudge towards eventual baptism, but there's also a sincere friendliness that comes across in their messages. And at a time in my life marked by solitude, the kindness was welcome. I'm Robert Shaw. This has been my Mormon Experience.